Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley, and we get together every week to share ideas on innovation, entrepreneurship, and education as they relate to service to others. And we love sharing cool ideas. We have folks from all over the world speak to us about how they're making interesting things happen for their communities, how they're using technology in innovative ways, how they just kind of approach the world a little differently. And we love having people share those stories so that we can really take those and make those a part of how we approach service as well. This week, we have with us Karen Fassenpower. And Karen and I have known each other for some time through the educational technology community, although she is involved in much more than just education. She is one who has worked in technology and marketing and community building for many, many years. She can tell you in more detail about any of that, but it is exciting to have her on, not because of her ed tech connections, but because she and her partner decided, maybe we'll just go off the grid. And so what does that mean? What does off the grid mean? Well, we're about to find out. So I would like to welcome via an unmuting our speaker today, Karen Fassenpower. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Rushton. It's so great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation about something other than educational technology today. So I am Karen Fassenpower. Just a little bit of backstory. I've worked for about 20 years in educational technology and lived for many years in Southern California, and really, really loved Southern California all the time I lived there. But at some point started feeling like maybe it was time for a change, and sort of especially thinking into the future, much like the Bay Area, where I was very, very densely crowded with people and also an expensive place to live. And I felt like I was starting with my work and with other things, starting to be interested in other pursuits that maybe weren't as income generating as my corporate work, and was thinking about someday, starting to look at some property. So my husband and I, his name's Brad, started looking around to buy property for someday. And we had a big list of criteria. For several years, we vacationed around places we thought might be somewhere we wanted to settle someday. And eventually we found what we felt like is really the perfect place for us. So I'm going to bring up some pictures now. So this is the place we finally landed, and this was about a little over 7 years ago that we found this community. It's right on the Arizona-New Mexico border, pretty far south. We're about 50 miles north of the Mexican border, and it's sort of roughly halfway between Tucson and El Paso. And sometimes when I say that, people kind of can't even get a grasp on what that means, but those are our two closest big cities, and we're about 2.5 hours east of Tucson and 3 hours west of El Paso. So just a little bit about where we live now. And so I should say, we found this community and immediately fell in love with it. And instead of thinking about moving there someday, we decided to immediately make the change. So we looked around at different properties, and I'm going to just start some pictures going so you can get a feel for what this area looks like. It is very, very remote. So the closest town to us is Rodeo, New Mexico, but we're on the Arizona side of the border, so our address that we use is Portal, Arizona. Neither of those towns has more than 500 people. And you can see, these are pictures from our property. You can see that there's really not a lot of folks around. And that was really one of our goals, was to get sort of away from the density of people and get a little closer to the land and sort of have some time and some personal space. So when we decided to move here, we were looking for a house. And at that point, there were very, very few houses on the market, and really none of them met our needs. So we looked at some other properties and eventually found a property that we just fell in love with, which is where we ended up buying. There was not a house there. And Brad said, let's build a house. And I had never planned to build a house. Didn't really know what was involved, but I felt like I was up for the adventure. Some of the things about this property, and particularly related to being off the grid, there were no power lines running to this property. So we had an option to either run power lines or go solar. And everyone in the sort of close surrounding area was solar, and they were very encouraging of us to do solar, partly because they didn't want power lines brought into the area because they felt like that would increase development, which we had never really thought of. I would say in general, I don't think this area is really ripe for a lot of development anyway, but power lines would definitely be more of a draw to people. So we looked at what the cost was to either run power lines or to do solar, and at that time, running power lines was going to be about $80,000, and solar was about half that. So it was a pretty easy decision, although we had never planned, it wasn't a plan of ours to live off the grid. That's what we ended up doing. And in our case, what off the grid means is not connected to the power grid. We do have phone lines, and we do, there's no cell access where we are, but I'm doing this from my home office, and we do have pretty good internet. So there's no, the internet here is not what's considered broadband by federal standards, but it's fast enough to stream video. So most days I can stream video with no problem. And so I'm just going to show some pictures now of our solar setup. We did a lot of research, and we really learned a tremendous amount about what's involved in going solar. And I can answer more questions. That's our battery bank. I can answer more questions about the details of the solar if people have, if they want to post them or whatever. But I would say overall, I've found that solar is hugely feasible. It makes me wonder why our country isn't doing more with solar. And if you came to our house, you wouldn't know that it was solar. I mean, it just has regular electricity like any other house. We have a pretty robust solar setup. A lot of people out here are solar, but most of them don't have probably as many, not so much the panels, but the batteries. We have a pretty robust battery bank because we, like I said, our house, you wouldn't know we were solar. We have lots of computers. We both work in technology. We have sort of every modern appliance and convenience, and it's, it's very, very comfortable. One of the things about moving here is the things I expected to be challenging or big issues, like solar, tended not to be. I mean, most days I don't even think about our solar. It just all works. But things that I didn't necessarily expect to be issues sometimes are, like we have more issues with water than we do with solar. We do have our own well and septic, so we have basically no city services here of any kind. There really isn't a city, and even road maintenance, you kind of do it yourself if you want it done. But the biggest part of this adventure for me was actually building our own house. And we actually built in 2 phases. And when I say we built our own house, I mean we actually had hammers and we actually did the construction. Another thing that I didn't realize before is when most people say they're building their own house, that's not what they mean. They mean that they're contracting with somebody, and we actually did all the work ourselves. It was a hugely, hugely empowering, just tremendous experience. It probably changed my outlook on life more than almost anything I've done. We built in 2 phases, and we built first and both of the buildings are fairly small, but we built a small office and guest house, and then we lived in that while we built the other phase. And each part took us about 2 years. So we've been out here for 7 years, and you can see the framing and all the stuff going on. Like I said, it was just really a great experience. I had not really done construction before. I'd done a little bit of finish work on wood. I think I'd drywalled once in my life, and just really didn't know much about it. Brad had more experience with construction. He had done construction 20 years ago when he was a kid, and sort of, done a little bit of electrical, and probably sort of like an average person. We learned as we went. We read a lot of books, and I would say I can't imagine doing this project without YouTube. And a shout out to everybody who posts YouTube videos about how to do things. It made this possible for us. And then we also posted videos as we did things, and we have a blog where we, did special things on how to do roofing and whatever. But we really learned a lot. And I would say, as somebody who works in education, just that experience of really learning and being brand new and having sometimes the fear of, what if we don't do this right? A lot of people said to me, like, is this house going to be safe? Is it going to be stable? And it all worked out great. It really was tremendous. So just a little bit about sort of how everything worked out and how the house worked out. We finished pretty much on schedule, and we ended up with a really lovely house. I have no regrets whatsoever about doing this, and I would really, I would encourage people, if you have an idea about something big you want to do, go for it. So this is a picture of the final sort of houses, minus landscaping and some other things. In addition to ending up with a really great house at the end, the process of going through this and also living out here has really changed my life in a lot of ways. And some of the ways it's changed were things I hoped for. Like, I was really going for a slower pace and sort of a more reflective life, I think, and to have space to do, to not just work, because in my old life, I would say I was very much the typical career consumed. That was the majority of my life. And I would say now my paying work is really not the majority of my life. And that's been a good change for me. I am working less hours at what I call my paying job. But I'm also working on a lot of other things, some of which are paying and some of which aren't, that are really more service oriented and oriented toward, I'm very interested in social justice work, and it took me getting the space in my personal life to be able to focus on that from a work standpoint. So I've gotten involved in more service projects. Probably the biggest change is we are now growing a lot of our own food. That is something I never anticipated doing. I'd never had a garden. I didn't know what was involved in growing food. But when you live 45 miles from a grocery store and you like fresh produce, you can't go on the way home from work every day. So, and that's something I really didn't think about when we came out here. I mean, I knew it was far from a grocery store, but I don't think I thought about what the implications of that were. So now I grow a lot of food. I make our own bread. I make cheese. I mean, just things that I never in my life thought I would be doing, but is very, very rewarding. We've started a seed library that's housed at we have a very small public library that is wonderful. And they've collaborated with us to start a seed library, which our community's been really supportive of. I have much closer community ties than I ever did in Southern California. Even though there were a lot of people around all the time, I was not personally connected to them. And here, it's very much what you hear about small towns. Everybody knows everybody. People will do anything for you. And it's just, I feel like I have really good connections with the community. And overall, just my quality of life is dramatically improved. I feel more connected to the physical environment. That's another thing I didn't really expect. But when you pump your own water out of the ground and nobody comes to get your trash, you think a lot more about, how all that stuff works. And I think in a city, you can be so removed from how things happen. And here we're just, we're very close to it. So that's kind of my story. And I'm happy to answer questions and talk more.
So how ridiculously cool is that? Oh my God, that's fantastic. So just the learning process. I mean, the empowering kind of nature of, well, I can't say I've built a house before. All right, well, it's awfully good, of course, that your husband's had some construction experience 20 years ago. Where to start with my questions? I have a list that's fairly epic at this point, and I'm kind of one of those people who's kind of deep into keeping the time. But you talked about, for example, gardening, making your own cheese. Now, do you raise any animals?
We actually don't. Almost everybody here has both pets and sort of livestock animals. It's one thing I didn't mention is the area we're in is a free-range cattle growing area, and so what that means, that's like a word I'm not sure I really knew what free range means. What it means is cows just go wherever isn't fenced. They're all around us. So our property is fenced, but we often have cows come right up to the gate, and we love the cows. We find them just lots of fun to watch. They are almost, in fact, I think they're all meat cows. They're not, and we don't eat meat, so we have a affinity for cows. And there are very few people who have dairy cows here, but many people have goats. And almost everybody has chickens. So it's really easy for us to get chickens and goat milk, at least, sometimes dairy milk or cow milk from other people. And we've sort of gone the route of not having animals, but we're both very passionate about animal issues. And for example, and this is something new since I've lived here, I won't buy eggs from a grocery store because I've just read too much about the conditions they're raised under, even the ones that are free range. That's not really a regulated term, and it's pretty awful. And here I know, like, I can see the chickens. So that's a big part of the food movement, is like, know where your food comes from and know what the conditions are like. I think it's hard to do that in a city, but here I go to get my eggs and I see the chickens and I see they're running around and they're happy and wonderful. And also the eggs are a lot better. It was funny when they had the big, I forget if it was salmonella or what it was, but the big scare with store eggs. The price of our local eggs went way up because suddenly people wanted to buy eggs that they knew where they came from. So,
Wow. Well, being able to thank the chickens for the eggs that you get, that's nothing wrong with that. You talked about, the surprises, right? And so, shifting from Southern California, urban Los Angeles, right,
right.
Which is its own phenomenon, to a long way from a place that's a long way from everywhere else. So weather issues. Do you have kind of issues related to how do you deal with weather phenomena there?
Yeah, that's an issue. So one of the items on our list of criteria when we were looking for a place is neither one of us really loves snow or a lot of cold. So I grew up in the Midwest. I had years of snow. I don't want to do it anymore. Brad had never really lived outside of Southern California in his whole life. So in a lot of ways, this was a bigger shift for him. But we're at about 4,500 feet. So we get some snow, and the winters, I say the winters are cold. People who live in places where it's really cold laugh at me. But this year we had snow 3 times, but never more than a couple inches, and it never lasted more than a day. So we've lived here for 7 years, and we had one really bad cold snap where it didn't get above freezing for maybe 4 days, and it actually got below 0. That's the coldest it's been, and everybody's pipes broke. I mean, in the whole state. It was a freak experience. But we get pretty high winds here in the spring, and I think that's something that sometimes makes people crazy. When we were looking to come here, we asked people around here, what's the thing about here that you hate that nobody talks about? And most people said the wind. It gets hot in the summer, but I like the desert and I like heat. It doesn't usually get a lot above 100, and it always cools off at night. It's I would say the weather is kind of like Palm Springs. The thing that's a surprise is I'm much more connected to the weather. Like, we're always looking at what's the weather going to be, and just even stuff like what phase the moon is at. I know that now, and I would have never known that in the city.
What is it about the phase of the moon that you pay attention to?
It's bright at night. I mean, it's visibly bright. Even where the sun sets is something that I'm aware of now, like how much the sunset moves on the horizon from season to season. I don't think it's something I ever thought about, because you don't see the horizon so much in a city like here. It's just all sky. I mean, and it does make you more connected to the sort of natural whatever's going around. We did have there was a Hurricane Odile that came, I'm trying to think if it was 2 years ago, and we got, I don't know, inches of rain, 7 inches of rain in a couple days, and it washed out a lot of our roads. And that was something that, we had to deal with. Like I said, there's mostly, we have one big main paved road, but mostly everybody lives on dirt roads. And if you want to maintain, you deal with that yourself. So we were pretty lucky. We didn't have too much damage, but we had to get a friend with a backhoe and come do some work on the end of our driveway and part of our road. So
So how
nothing
far
terrible.
are you from the paved road?
We're actually pretty close. We're about a mile.
Okay.
So not bad. But a lot of people are further out. And that's something that I didn't think about as being an advantage, but it really is, because some people during Odile, and even we get monsoonal rains here, which I didn't know about, but it's just, we get like 6 weeks where it rains every single day. And people who live farther from the main road, the dirt roads tend to get worse and worse as you get further back. And sometimes people are stuck, like they can't get off their property for several days. And I didn't realize that would be an issue. And it just is luck that we're on first of all, we're on a pretty good dirt road, but also we're pretty close to the main road. So that's not been a problem for us, but that wasn't something I considered when we looked at properties.
Wow. I mean, I'm thinking about, things like there's a Ken Robinson TED Talk about the Death Valley of education, and he talks about that amazing story of Death Valley having once, gotten this kind of freak rain, and not long after, there was this incredible flowering in the desert. I mean, it just turned into this incredible place of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, well, probably after, off-season rains or something, you might see something like that, or the beauty of the sky. You must be looking right at the Milky Way all the time, yeah.
It's amazing. It really is amazing. Yeah. And we do get great blooms here.
I can only guess. Now, does that become like a big allergy issue or anything like that, or?
Sometimes, yes.
Yeah. But not a big fun thing to talk about, I'm guessing. So
yeah.
One of the things we should do, by the way, this is kind of one of those meta moments in the recording, is we should get you to share a couple of the pictures with me, so I can use those as the power of images segment on this. And of course, if you are watching this as the recording, you're like, I've already seen those. Of course, you have. The space-time continuum, right? So when we talk about the not having a cell signal, I mean, like I'm old enough to remember not having a cell signal, and we liked it, or whatever, right? But when do you use technologies in interesting ways? Do you have a cell phone, for example, that connects to Google Voice, and you handle things that way?
Well, so you're right. It's a big issue. We have Wi-Fi set up that's a strong Wi-Fi signal, and we mostly do everything over Wi-Fi. We both have cell phones, and Brad has his connected to Google Voice, so it's supposed to ring to that or ring to his phone. I've not done that because I don't know. Either I don't know why, but I haven't set that up. It seemed like it was problematic. So I have a landline number. I would say the vast majority of my professional related communications are online like this. So, people more often ping me on G+ or something. But I mean, the day-to-day thing that makes this work for us is a great Wi-Fi signal, and we do have it open, so we have neighbors sometimes who pull up to our road to check their email. I mean, so one area of work that I've gotten involved in that's new for me is rural policy, and the whole broadband issue around rural policy. It's a real disadvantage to school kids to not have regular wireless access. And I would say, like many rural areas, the poverty level is high here, and so affordability of any kind of internet access And we have basically one option. I mean, I guess you could do satellite, which is what we thought we were going to have to do when we came here. So we're very happy we don't have to have satellite. We do have a wonderful public library that has open Wi-Fi, and there are a couple houses or other places that people know have open Wi-Fi. But again, we're not at broadband speed, and that's another rural policy issue that a couple groups that I do work with are pursuing is, there's no reason there couldn't be higher speed access here. It's just the local carrier doesn't do it. And it's, it's a small co-op, and that's the people who have regular electrical, it's the same thing. It's rural co-ops, which is another thing I didn't know anything about, but there's not really competition. So those are all sort of areas to think about.
Wow. Well, when I think about things like that, I hear all kinds of stories about places in very rural parts of the world where getting access to online technologies has allowed them to better kind of track what they're doing in terms of the things they need to buy for their farm or whatever it may be, right? But it really helps pull people from poverty to have access to information. Now, while it's new for you to be 7 years new to you to be in the part of the country you're in, I believe you spent time in Tanzania. Is that right? Tell
I
me
did.
how did these things kind of connect, if at all?
Yeah, I did. So apparently every 10 years or so, I like to totally turn my life upside down. And the time before this was I'm going to teach in Africa for 2 years, which was a tremendous experience. And particularly when we first moved here, a lot of things about here reminded me of being in Tanzania. The landscape is not dissimilar, and just the sort of how you deal with a lot of things that people take for granted, and just having that adaptability. But when you were talking about internet, I was thinking about in a lot of developing nations, they've really skipped the whole landline piece and gone right to cell. So in some ways, there are developing countries that have better speeds and better services than we have here. I think the not having cell, personally, I kind of love it. I mean, when we first came here, especially, I thought, how great, there's times of the day where people just can't reach me, and that's not really a bad thing. But I've come to appreciate that it's really a public safety issue also. And again, in the rural policy work I do, particularly people, and I would say the population here skews toward more affluent people and people like me who came here because they wanted to do this, and then a population that is mostly elderly and doesn't have income sources. And in that lower demographic here, a lot of people oddly have cell phones, and some of them are split. They're only here part of the year, but they often have cell phones that they use in town, and some of them don't have landlines, and I would say the vast majority don't have internet. And that's, especially for people who don't have phones at all, that is a safety issue, and people do talk about, and you're right. I mean, we grew up in a time where nobody had cell phones and nobody thought it was a public safety issue. So I guess everything's relative, but it's interesting.
Well, what doesn't change, at least via the presence or absence of technology, is the nature of community, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you talk about, kind of people will help each other out. They know each other. I think my mother once described the town where I did a lot of my growing up, Magnolia, Arkansas. Mm-hmm. When I was talking to her about this, and she said, well, this is a town where people care whether you live or die, right? And and you balance that against people kind of being nosier than you might want based on how you see the world or whatever it might be, right?
That's true.
But I'm thinking that your experience with the library, for example, has that library been there the entire time you've been there?
It has. It's a library in an old school building, and it is so wonderful. And it's a community center. I mean, we don't really have, there's no municipal buildings or town structure, and really the post office and the library are where people gather. But you're right, people care about each other. And I think, a real tangible example of that for me is here if you break down on the side of the road, or anytime if I'm driving by myself and I see somebody pulled over, everybody stops. And you just would never even think about something bad happening. Like in Los Angeles, I wouldn't do that because I would be concerned, especially if I was by myself and it was at night, I'd be concerned for my safety. Here, I would just never think twice about even, getting in a car with somebody. Just people really, are very genuine. I think what you see is what you get with people, for the good and the bad. But people do care about each other a lot.
Wonderful. Well, but while I could keep going on and on and on with questions about this, because this is such a cool topic, I should wind down our recording, and so I'll finish that, and then I'll give to you kind of the last word, just kind of the last piece of encouragement for people who are involved in an internationally online service club. Kind of whatever thoughts you want to share with our members and our guests in Rotary around the world. So for everybody, just a quick reminder that every week we do this. Our presentation is the capstone of the meeting, but there are a couple things to do afterwards, and those two are, first of all, there's an attendance survey. Please let us know you attended. Even if you are not a Rotarian, we want to at least be able to send a thank you that says, hey, thanks for joining us. And if you are a Rotarian, having filled out that survey properly with your properly spelled email address means that you'll get an email that you can pass to your secretary of your club so as to use this as a makeup. Additionally, a little farther down, there's the Discuss system, DISQUS, and you can create a Discuss account yourself, or just use your Facebook or another thing, whatever, and log in and leave a comment. You got to leave a comment, because that's part of our community, right? That's our way of getting to know each other, of sharing ideas, of asking questions. We often have speakers actually respond to the questions that are asked. No pressure, Karen, but there you go. And that's part of the fun of it for us. So with that, I'll finish up, leave the last word to Karen, who will also kind of close the recording. And then Karen, you and I can keep talking from there.
Great. Well, I enjoyed this so much. Thank you, everyone, for making this possible. And I guess my closing thought would be just, if you have always had a dream of something you wanted to do, or you have an idea of something big, but you're not sure, I would just say, go for it. I think we are all capable of so much more than even we imagine. And I look forward to seeing everybody on the forum, and I will definitely check in and look forward to talking more. So thank you.